You're listening to Turning 75 when last week I was 16, a celebration of getting where we are today and a reminder about why we still matter. Hello, it's Bonnie. Let's sit on the porch swing for a while, 'cause it's that kind of a day. A day of reflection on how we baby boomers turned on the light in this world. Up until about 3 years ago, I was teaching about 10 to 12 fitness classes a week. And as a fitness instructor, I taught classes for all ages of people, but I did specialize in senior fitness. Not the kind where you sit in a chair like a silver sneakers class doing your little arms up, arms down, but I hosted active workouts specific to senior bodies. But the truth is, there's not much difference in the workouts for younger people than older people because a body of 60 can do the exact same things a body of 30 can do. But if you do not use those muscles, you will lose the ability until you retrain your body to movement. Remember this. I was thinking about the movements for a class that I teach, and while I think about what I'm going to do in a class, I'm usually at my computer and take brain breaks by looking at or listening to things online. I might play a game or research a topic, all the time using those breaks to energize my creative thought process. I was doing a brain break when I saw an article about how President John F. Kennedy years were described as Camelot. While I knew what it meant, I wanted to understand the purpose of calling that time period Camelot. So I Googled, and here's a summary of what I found. Camelot symbolizes an idealized realm of chivalry, justice, honor, and noble purpose. It represents an age of hope and righteousness. It's often used as a metaphor for times of excitement, optimism, high achievement, and all of this was seen during the President Kennedy's presidency. Okay, that came out kind of convoluted, but you know what I mean. And Camelot is an aspirational ideal rather than an historic place. And we all remember some of JFK's famous quotes like, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Another one was, mankind must put an end to war before war puts an end to mankind. Think about the relevancy of some of these things. Another quote was, the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. He said, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. One final one, victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. Now, I was in 9th grade when John F. Kennedy was killed. And it did have a place of meaning in my life. I mean, I remember what went on, but my high school years were much more impactful for me because those were the years where America was dealing with the world changes due to assassinations. We dealt with Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and Medgar Evers. It was a time of confusion and of change. Now, this podcast was supposed to be about how we navigated our lives and raised a generation of children, blah, blah, blah. But then I start to sidetrack and thinking about how we truly lived in the best of times and also in the worst of times. Think about it. Baby boomers are those people born from 1946 to 1964. World War II had just ended, and the entire country was in a time of rebirth and rebuilding, and everything looked great. The soldiers were coming home from the war, and they were buying houses, and neighborhoods were being developed in the suburbs. People had good jobs, and the living was easy. So as children, we were raised in a time of Camelot. But as we grew, we wanted more. Women were not content to stay at home being housewives. We wanted to go to work and use our brains. Everyone was asking for fair treatment in society, whether it was civil rights or women's rights or control of our own bodies. We weren't content with the status quo. We wanted more, and we were willing to loudly let the world know that we were all equal on all levels. We were marching, We were not being quiet about what we deserved. We were demanding change, and we were winning. Because why? We were Camelot, and life was pretty good. In my opinion, as I was thinking about this, baby boomers lived through the most influential of times so far. We defined our lives and we made it happen. Why? Because we were raised from childhood to believe that we could have what we wanted as long as we were willing to fight for it. I graduated high school in 1968, right in the middle of positive, tumultuous times. We went through Woodstock right into the corporate boardrooms. We went from Elvis to Motown to disco without a hitch. Now we tuned in and turned out and came back and used our entrepreneurial spirit to mold successful companies that responded to the changing environment of our times. There were many major industries that were started by college dropouts in their parents' garage, but the world was ready for it, and we were ready to accept it. And knowledge exploded. Advances in technology, medicine, manufacturing were coming fast and furious. But yet we still raised our families and hoped that they never, ever, ever found out what we really did in the 60s. Some of them things should just stay behind closed doors. But we were Camelot, and it was the best of times. I lived a very middle-class existence. Some people might say entitled, because me and my friends all lived in an environment where we did not question the fact that the world would give us what we wanted as long as we worked for it. I lived in a neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania called West Mount Airy, and it was one of the very successful integrated neighborhoods. A book was written about it, as a matter of fact. There were doctors and lawyers and psychologists and educators and professional adults that were raising college-bound children. Now, there were a lot of ethnic families. There were a lot of all religious, Jewish, any other kind of religious families, and we didn't care. We may have segregated close friendships out of preference, but not out of necessity. I had friends of all kinds. We ate dinner at each other's houses. We spent the night at each other's houses. We just had fun being young. And those years gently segued into adulthood. We all pretty much married in our early 20s, had children, and life went on. My daughter was born in 1973. But all of our kids that we raised at that time were called free-range children. Now, I gave my daughter structure in her life. She had rules, but basically she always made her own decisions. She would come to me and say, I'm going to do this. And I'd say, okay, how much does it cost? Where you need to be? And as her son was entering college, and he was very young when he went to college, or he's in college now, we got on the conversation about parenting styles. And I reminded her that she never asked permission for anything she wanted to do. Now, she was a good kid. That's why we could do that. She had no major problems. I mean, she was just a really, really good kid. I wonder where she came from. But a couple of months ago, while I was on another brain break, I saw an article about how did children who were raised in such free-range environments, those were our kids, how did they end up being helicopter parents for their own kids? The internet. Remember, we did not have access to a knowledge of all the things happening in our world because we didn't have the internet when we were raising our children. Our children, however, did have the internet. Now, my daughter and I did not let her son range freely. But is crime any worse now than it was when we were raising our children? Some statistics say no. It's just we weren't aware of what was and what could happen. Maybe because we were born in an era of trust that we still believed in as adults. Back to Camelot. The brain went further down the rabbit hole, and I started thinking about the changes throughout our years. Now, as a small child, I remember we had a telephone, but it was a party line. The phone number was shared between 2 or more people. I remember going to an aunt's house so we could see what color television looked like because we had an old black and white TV. I remember when roller skates had a key. Remember those metal roller skates? You put them on your foot and you keyed them up so they could be tight. And we skated in the middle of the street. In the middle of the street for hours. No helmets, no knee pads. And I don't remember any major and serious industries. We would pick honeysuckles off of a bush. Remember that? And we would suck out the sweet nectar. Now, did anyone say, don't do that, there's pollution? We didn't worry about that stuff. It was a different world. The air wasn't as polluted. Do you remember going to the library where you had to research a topic for homework? Or hopefully your home had encyclopedias? Phone booths. Don't see those anymore. Baby boomers, think about the great advancements in medicine. Now, I am immensely grateful for the strides made in the medical community throughout our lifetime. However, I've always relied first on the healing benefits of plants, crystals, and positive mind-body connections. Find out what the diagnosis is, then I'm going to figure out a way to cure it. It was the era of miniskirts and hot pants. Now, back then, I had the skinny, twiggy type body, and I wore my skirts really short. If I went on an escalator going up, I would hold down the back of my skirt. Our parents were scandalized because we showed our legs, we wore bikinis, we showed more skin than any other generation. Now, we may not have had our boobs hanging out like they do today, but we did rock that boat. Doesn't it sound funny when we're talking about the good old days, I don't care what anyone says. Those years were golden. We did what we had to do, but we still held on to the belief that the world would always be the same because we were Camelot, and we responded to the opportunity to turn on a light during the best of times. I don't know how you lived, but I've always lived in a way that I say thanks to my higher powers for getting me through many sticky situations. I still hold on to my angels and ancestors. I call them my ANAs, and thank them for watching over me even now. And we were Camelot until COVID. Now that hit me hard, and it wasn't the illness that hit me. It was the closing of our world. I mean, stores closed, schools closed, companies closed, the isolation. It was hard for me to fathom living through such dire times. It wasn't supposed to be that way, people. It was bad for so many people emotionally and mentally. It was just something that I never even dreamed of, that I lived through a time where they had to close down my world. And now, I'm going to say it again, and now we are losing our democracy along with our minds. And no one seems to be doing anything other than watching our Camelot die. And it seems to be ending. Everything we fought for, everything we worked hard at changing, gone. Gone because some people pulled a lever in a booth. They didn't know. We didn't know. Now we are in the worst of times. Back to the beginning. Remember I said we lived in the best of times and the worst of times? And also, back in the beginning of this podcast, I said our bodies can still do in our 70s and 80s what it did in our 30s and 40s. But we stopped using and utilizing those muscles, and we let it slip away. But let us not forget who we are. Our bodies may not be able to get out there and march anymore, but we cannot let our brains atrophy into thinking that we can't because we stopped flexing and we stopped moving. Our voices can still make a difference. So yeah, leave the marching to the younger folks. But we cannot let our voices go quiet. The same voices that molded the United States into one of the greatest countries ever. Guys, we did that. And we also elected all the congressmen and senators and judges and all those other people who are supposed to be our leaders but are just watching our world go down the drain. This world belongs to us. We are the baby boomers. We are Camelot. And we cannot let this be the end of our story. Tune in next time when I talk a little bit about our voices and how we can open up the vents, because we have something to say and we should get ready to speak our truth and say it loudly. Not just about what's happening on our world, but what's happening in our backyards. The session is called Open Up the Vents, and it's going to be a blast.